We'll just wait for a couple of seconds. All right. So let's begin. Hello and welcome everyone to this new episode of Live in Conversation. This is your host, Dr. Vijayta Mahendru. And in the very beginning, I would like to apologize to my regular audience for coming after 2 full weeks. But please, there's a very big, compensation that I have in lieu of this break that I took. So today we have with us Professor Eleanor Nesbitt, who's Professor Emeritus at the Warwick University and is a pioneer of Global Sikh Studies, writer of several books and articles, and mentor to countless students, including myself. Welcome, ma'am. Thank you so much for accepting to come on this humble platform of Mast Qalandar Travels. Please.
It's such an honor to be here. I feel very happy to have been singled out for this privilege.
So before we begin, ma'am, I'll just briefly tell about what this talk is going to be like. So Professor Eleanor Nesbitt had come to India and stayed here for about 2.5 years in the 70s. And in this talk, we will be talking about her experiences in India, what she encountered. So it's going to be like how we read about, Ibn Battuta, and we read about these travelers who have come in the past to our land, and what are their reflections about our country. So that's the kind of conversation we are looking forward to. So before we go into that, ma'am, would you like to tell us about your pre-India life in the UK?
Yes, well, I was brought up in Christchurch, not the New Zealand one, but the one on the south coast of England, and educated in Bournemouth, which was the nearby town. And I was an only child, and I was very, very close to my pets, and I was very keen on visiting the countryside and drawing and painting flowers and writing poems and having adventures, really. But during that time, my mother would tell me, not very precisely, but she would tell me that my great-great-grandmother had been to India, and she knew almost nothing about it. And the letters that my great-great-grandmother had sent back in Victorian handwriting, crossed, horizontally and vertically, mysteriously disappeared. But the fact that my great-great-grandmother had, at the beginning of the 19th century, been to India and come back safe and sound seemed to be a good omen for what I decided to do later.
Wow. So, ma'am, what motivated you apart from this fact? What other things was there anything else that motivated you to come to India? And what was like the duration? The duration, actually, I know it's 2.5 years, but can you tell us exactly between which dates and years?
Yes, I think it was the 9th of September in 1974 that I came out to India, and I came back to England in 1977 in March. So I was in India for the whole of the emergency, which we'll probably talk about a bit later.
Yeah.
And as to motivation, well, it's an interesting one. I mean, I was very, very interested in language, in culture, in religion. And I wanted to do something that was useful somewhere that it was interesting to be. And India was somewhere where I could use English to teach and do something that was a little bit useful to some people. But I know that while I was at university, I was in Cambridge, and I started saying to people when they said, "What are you going to do next?" I'd say, "Well, I'm going to go to India." And it was just a fact. It wasn't as if I'd made any decision. I do remember one point at which somebody called Paul Sudhakar, who was a religious thinker from South India, came and gave a lecture in 1975 in Cambridge. And he's somebody who had written on the Bhagavad Gita and the Christian gospel very much in parallel. And he gave his lecture, and during his lecture, I just felt that he happened to have rested his eyes on me. We never had any conversation or anything, but from that point, I just knew I was going to go to India. actually, funnily enough, when I was in India and I was in Kerala, I found out where he was and went to see him. But he was so caught up in the test match that he didn't really have any conversation.
Oh God, that must have been a bummer. But yeah, interesting. So many things come together to, kind of bring you to India. That's really quite interesting. And how did you fund your trip at that time, ma'am? And did you fly
Well, of
or
course,
you
I was
took
a
the
penniless
ship?
student, and I came out. Yeah, I did fly. I wasn't like my husband's generation who came out by sea. But what I did, because I was in Bournemouth and there were lots of language students, mainly who came from France and Spain and so on, I spent the summer teaching English in a rather grand public school. It was very grand, but it didn't have facilities. So, for example, I remember combing the grounds to pick up pieces of the natural chalk so that I had something to write on the blackboard with.
Whoa. So you kind of learned, like, how to teach in the beginning. That was like the starting point.
Well, I did my teaching course, what we call a certificate in education, um, in Oxford before I set out. My tutor she warned me it was not sensible to go to India until I had done a probationary year and fully qualified as a teacher. She said there aren't many jobs and you can't assume you'll get a job and so on. But she couldn't have given worse advice, because going to India was really the kickstart for everything that I've done ever since in one way or another. So I
Yeah.
always used to tell my students, the best advice is not to follow your tutor's advice.
So, ma'am, in the 70's, when, people from the West were coming through this overland route, crossing all of Europe, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and entering India and onwards to Nepal, in short, they were taking this hippie trail, and they were kind of enjoying life in the 70's, wild and free. You came to India as a teacher. That's quite unique and.
I think quite a few people did do that. In fact, one of my friends who did come out overland later on came out as a teacher himself, and yeah, coming overland was possible then because you could go through countries like Afghanistan, um, on the top
Sure.
of a colourful lorry in a way that people wouldn't be quite so able to do probably now. But I mean, in India, in a sense, I had a cushier time because I was living in a school and being looked after, and the hippies I saw tended to look rather ill, and they often were quite ill because of their lifestyle. I made friends with some hippies in Nainital. They were devotees of a local Swami Ganesh, um, and probably slightly scandalized the staff in my very respectable school by bringing them up for dinner with the head teacher and the others. But I saw hippies in Goa, and I was actually rather shocked at the total disregard for local convention and just a complete disregard. Whereas I was much more interested in trying to understand what was going on around me and being respectful of it as far as I could be.
Yeah, you had more of the ethnographic, stint in you, and the hippies were, of course, in their own world. So, ma'am, you stayed in Nainital, yeah?
Yes, that was where I was based.
Okay, so tell us about Nainital and how
Well,
that experience was.
yes, I was in All Saints School. What had happened was that the year before I'd had funding to go to Jerusalem for a few weeks, and while I was there, I'd met someone who, with her husband, had a little Christian ashram in India. And when I said I was going to India, probably to teach, she gave me the addresses of two headmistresses, one in Delhi and one in Nainital. The one in Delhi didn't need me, and the one in Nainital did. So I was appointed. I asked her for anything I could read before I came, and she told me to read Jim Corbett's Man Eaters of Kamang. So the only thing I knew about where I was going was that people had been eaten by man-eating tigers, and that there was
And
a
an
lake
English
there,
officer
and that somebody's hand, one of
had
the victims' hands,
saved
would.
a lot of lives, his hunting.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was saying, and an Englishman, Jim Corbett, had kind of saved a lot of lives by his hunting
He
in
had, but
that
it was
area.
still slightly unnerving reading for somebody who was coming out to a new country, to a new job.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I was in this beautiful location. My room looked out over the lake. It was possible early in the morning to climb up and see the snows lit up by the sunrise, if one was energetic enough to get up that early. It was a strange life because I had 2 years, which basically consisted of continuous 9-month-long terms. And a 9-month long term is pretty daunting, especially in a boarding school where you're teaching on Saturday as well as during the week, and you've got other duties, and you've got all the marking, and you've got no privacy, well, not much privacy anyway. So when I look back, I think, oh my goodness, how did I manage with all that? But of course, it was great because people were so hospitable. My colleagues, local people, everybody was so helpful and friendly. And when I did silly things, they didn't make a lot of it. Like buying a sari and not knowing which way up to wear it. And one of them did tactfully point out that it was upside down. I think it had a design like this, actually. And, I'd got the mango motif the wrong way up. So
Oh,
I took it all, as helpful rather than critical. And I've still got the friends that I made both locally in the town, or some of them, and through the school. So that's a wonderful gift.
so ma'am, people generally take such big decisions of kind of moving from one country to the other, even if it's temporarily. I mean, 2 years is a long time. Generally, it's kind of a soul searching exercise. So, what was your inner quest behind coming?
It's an interesting one. I mean, academically, I was interested in religious studies, and I'd studied Christianity, Judaism, Islam, but nothing about Hindu or Sikh tradition or Buddhist tradition. So I was very, very keen to learn, not to become, but to learn. I don't know how much of a quest I had. I certainly had a need to do something a bit like voluntary service overseas, to feel that I was giving to the community. And of course, I gained far more than I gave, but I did have that motive of trying to do something useful. In my case, mainly teaching English in an English medium school, which probably isn't the most useful thing to do, but it made me feel part of society, more than if I'd just been a wanderer going about. And it wasn't that I was sort of looking, I suppose, for some spiritual guidance or breakthrough, but I was finding it all the time. The sheer beauty of where I travelled, where I lived, the mountains, and later on the sea, and the vastness of the Ganga, the rivers, and the wonderful kindness of people who often had very, very little to give and would share what they had. And also, there were inspirational people whom I met. In some cases, Gandhians, in 2 cases, Quaker Gandhians, i.e. they came originally from Britain but were Indian nationals who did a tremendous amount in India. One of them was Laurie Baker, the architect who pioneered a whole school of architecture which was low cost, using local materials, influenced by local design, taking very seriously the needs of whoever it was, whether it was a hospital or a school or whatever. I was inspired by people like that and how they used their natural talent and their training to do something that was in some ways revolutionary, because the whole trend, for instance, in architecture at that time was to mimic something that was more Western. So that sort of person contributed to my spiritual journey, even if I wasn't, initially looking for that.
Yeah. So lovely. And ma'am, you said that you were met with kindness and experiences where people were very good to you. So it'll be good for us Indians who are watching to know some of your experiences in that regard. Can you share something?
Yes, well, it was very simple sounding things. For instance, the first time I caught a train in India, it was probably to go from Delhi to Lucknow. It was part of my journey across North India in the winter of 1974, 1975. And I didn't realize in my innocence that it would be cold at night. So there was I lying on my, the bench in the third class sleeper, and a woman on the bench the other side of the, of our little sort of cubicle. She, the carriage, she saw that, here was this foreigner who was cold, and she reached out with her blanket, and it was a coarse brown blanket. She made sure that I was wrapped up in it as well as her. And she or others on other journeys would share some of their paranta or whatever it was they were having. So instinctively, they saw somebody who was traveling in a long way from home, and they would reach out and do some basic thing instinctively, to be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. That's how Indians, generally are. We take guests very
And
seriously.
it made me feel so bad, because at the same time I was receiving news through the media and so on about, racism in Britain, and an unsympathetic attitude to people who came from other countries. And I felt so bad about it, that this is what people were receiving, whereas everyone, whether they were a villager or an educated person or whoever they were, they just saw me as somebody who was a long way from home and needed some support in some way. Whereas in my own country, people were just being seen, it seemed, as somehow intruders, with no imagination for how they might be feeling. Of course, I'm
Yeah.
generalizing, but that was the feeling I had of this stark contrast when I was traveling in India.
Yeah, yeah. I understand, yeah, the generalization part of it, but yeah, the general spirit is what is, the general feeling is the spirit of the times, and that was the spirit of the times in the UK at that time, 70's, lot of racial debates and stuff going on.
Yeah, and also there were
Multi-ethnic.
lots of initiatives to make people work
Yes.
welcome, and to provide. That was going on at the same time as well.
Sure, sure. Things were changing gradually, but yeah, it was a racist time at that time. So, ma'am, during vacations, as you said, you had 9 months of teaching period. You did not return to England, right? So, what would you
No,
do
it
when?
wasn't. It would never have occurred to me to return to England, and I simply communicated with people at home through letters. They knew I'd gone for over 2 years, so it wasn't an issue. I remember when my father came out in 1977 to travel home with me, and I heard his voice at the airport. I didn't really recognize it, because I hadn't heard his voice for 2.5 years, and
So,
that was a strange
telephone did
time.
exist, but I think it was not common. It was
The
only for like
telephone existed,
executives or something.
but for trunk calls, people people used to talk about maturing the calls, and sometimes a little bit of money was involved in getting the calls matured. People just didn't do it. Inland, you use telegrams, and one funny incident relating to telegrams. I remember buying some jalebis from a local halwai, and when I got the jalebis home, I found that each one was wrapped in a telegram, and each telegram was telling somebody of a family member's death. I mean, recycling in India was absolutely, amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The kind of news we get to read in the papers that our food is wrapped even till date, it's just so amusing. It's just so amusing.
So anyway, if I was traveling in India, I would send telegrams ahead, which didn't always arrive, and it didn't somehow seem to matter. By coincidence, things would fall into place, even if the actual communication hadn't happened.
Yeah. And even like when we were growing up, we did not have instant messaging or anything. We had the normal the regular telephone, one connection in a house, and communication was not as seamless as it is today, but things seem to somehow just work magically. Parents were not always in touch with their children and what they were doing, and things were kind of, yeah, they used to work. So, ma'am, you once showed me those letters. Do you have it with you,
Oh
the letter?
yes,
to
This is
write home.
this is a sort of letter. So every week,
Wow.
I would write one of these letters home. This one has actually been embellished with one of the little violets that grew
Ma'am, can you
on the
bring
rock
it
face.
closer to the camera of your?
In
Oh,
the monsoon, as far as I
it's
remember, the rocks would be covered with ferns
it's
and,
lovely.
and violets like this. So I would use
And
the
can you show the stamp on this, please?
yeah. So it's printed. It's like that.
Okay, okay.
Um,
One rupee
and
50 paisa.
yes,
Yeah.
one,
Okay.
1 rupee 50 paisa. Well, that was fair enough. I mean, I can't remember what I was earning, but it was very little.
No, but every week you used to write these inland letters home.
Yes, and sometimes more because so much was going on, and I was just bursting to tell people. And most of these letters went to my parents, who who saved them up for me.
Yeah, who
Um,
saved them up? They're in such perfect condition.
yeah, well, they haven't been looked at actually for the last nearly 50 years. They were in a box, and when you said, "Would you talk about your travels?" I got the box out.
Oh, that's lovely. Really, I mean, I wish I could get a hold of these letters. I really dig, this kind of stuff. It's
Well, I probably
amazing.
ought to make sure that they don't get lost like my great grandmothers, because
Yeah.
they are quite interesting actually. The references to various people who later became better known, or people who were already well known, and just I suppose my description of the quirkiness of life, the things that happened, because there were very odd things that happened. Like I remember I was meeting with Professor Faruqi, who was a professor of Urdu at Delhi University. And he said, "Oh, I've got a speech that I've had to write. Would you like to just correct it or improve it a bit?" Well, it only it only happened to be the speech that he was writing for the president, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad, to give on the 650th anniversary of arguably the first poet in the Urdu language, Amir Khusro. So there was and I was being presented with this speech that the president was about to make. These
Wow.
really funny things would happen.
That's just really fascinating. Fascinating. And you corrected, kind of
Oh,
edited
I don't think there was anything to correct. It was probably a sort of, I don't know, he was
just
always being
a
courteous.
proofreading you did. That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah.
And tell us some more such stories.
What of really surprising things that happened? Well,
Yeah, yeah.
I suppose it was a surprise as well when two established botanical artists in Delhi, who were related to one of my friends who might even be watching now, I suppose, when they said, "Oh, would you like to make a career out of being a botanical artist? We could make you an apprentice, and you could stay, and that's what you could do." And I thought, "Oh, what a wonderful life." The wife did say to me, of course, it's much easier being a male botanical artist than a female one, because, if guests come, I have to give up my painting and make the tea, whereas, obviously, if you're the man, you don't have to. But that would have been a wonderful life. But I had a limited time that I was allowed to stay in India. And in any case, I needed to go home and see my
Yeah.
parents again. But
Yeah.
sometimes you think about these sort of alternative lives that you might have had.
So you could have been a botanical artist
Who knows? Who knows?
of tropical plants. That would have been
That's
another.
very much in the tradition of the
So
British Raj.
instead of social sciences, you would have been more well known in the botany circuit in the world.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because it's very much part of a tradition of Western travellers, perhaps particularly women travellers in India in the 19th century, who would do their paintings very
Yes,
often,
yes, sure, sure. But
of
then they
plants.
would choose different kinds of subjects, mostly like I think landscapes and all. But were they also like painting a lot of flora around?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So yes, so in the book that I eventually hope to launch this year, some of the women who write about Sikhs, they also happen to be botanical artists, amateur botanical artists.
Okay, okay. So,
Yeah,
ma'am, before we go into more of your experiences, let's kind of share your pictures here with our audience and discuss about your experiences during, the time of clicking those pictures, what was going on, you know?
Yes, that's fine. I wish I could share the ones that were color transparencies, but they're much less easy to share. So these are some of the snapshots.
Yeah, yeah. I also wish we could have had those. Just a second.
There was one particularly I had in mind, which shows the boat in which I crossed the Chumble River, which was about as full of water as it could be, and but at the same time there were people walking each side of it, along with the man who was sort of punting it from inside. And it was years later that I was told that the Chumble River was full of crocodiles.
Yeah, ma'am, just give me 1 second. All right. So, is my screen
Oh yes,
visible now?
yes.
Wow, this first photo is so lovely.
Yeah, so I said that my father came out. He didn't just sort of bring me home. He travelled around India. He was passionate about architecture, so clearly the Taj Mahal was somewhere where he absolutely had to go. And
Yeah.
I think that was my second visit. And so there I am, sitting
Look
in
at
my.
you, already so Indianized, your attire, your hair. And I think you're also tanned quite a bit with your
Yes, I
skin.
know. So once or twice, I remember on a bus near Yamunanagar, I remember somebody sort of reaching across to talk to me in Punjabi, and I felt so bad because I couldn't answer. Um, but I was rather
Now,
flattered that she thought I looked as if I might be able to understand Punjabi.
yeah,
And so,
sure. You look like a Sardarni here. All right. This,
yes, this is with one of my college friends who came out to travel with me in or round South India in the winter of 76, 77. And we were traveling with my dear friend and colleague Kamla Sahni, who was my companion on a number of my travels, and through whose eyes partly I experienced India and got to understand a lot more than I would have done otherwise.
and
And
this is
you
the
can see we're at Mahabalipuram here.
Shore Temple, yeah?
Yes, yes,
Oh, it's so lovely. Such few people. You can't see, you can just not get this scene anymore. It's just so full of people and hawkers and everything now. And
yes,
the picnic baskets, love them. They're back
yes.
in
I
fashion.
think they were made in Goa, as far as I remember. So
Huh?
they were made of natural natural fiber. Um,
Yeah. No, they're back in fashion. People are carrying these now as well.
yes.
These timeless.
Yeah, so we're in Cochin, obviously, in the Chinese fishing
Fish-
nets,
Yeah, same.
and here
And
we are at the other end of the country. This is Kamla, my colleague, and
okay.
myself, and it's the puja holidays. It's Dussehra time, so it's late autumn, and we're in Badrinath before Badrinath closes down,
Close
or
for the
it used to close
winters.
down anyway in the winter to travellers, and there would only be the Indian Army around. So there we are in Badrinath.
So fashionable you are, lovely. And even the temple also, again, you can't find it so empty anymore. Lovely.
Yes,
And you saw the parade on 26th January in
yes,
Delhi.
twice because my colleague's um, brother had access. We were able to sit right in the front and see the parades go past, and I was captivated by all the displays from all the states of India, including um, the Nicobar and Andaman Islands and the
So it used to be the
far
same
north.
that time as well, like, these big tableaus.
Yes,
This,
yes, because
yeah?
I've seen it subsequently on television. Yes, the same idea. Um,
Oh,
yes.
wow.
But I think the sky was clearer. There was much less pollution.
Sure, sure, of course. Uh, wow.
So
Golden
this,
Temple.
so this is my first experience of Darbar Sahib, Harmandir Sahib. You can see it's
Yeah.
evening. Um, we'd been to Anandpur Sahib, and we
Hmm.
were staying in a dental college near Harmandir Sahib. Um,
How come?
I really don't know. It must have been through a connection of my colleague Kamla Sahni, but I don't remember quite why we were in a
Okay.
dental college. But that's where we were. In Madras, I remember staying in a um, college for the deaf. We seemed to stay in interesting institutions, not just in hotels, as we travelled around.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And seriously, I mean, now that I'm looking at this picture, it's reminding me of that one picture. I'm forgetting the name of the artist who has drawn this Harmandir Sahib from, I think, the 18th century, where there are people. Some of them are bathing, some of them are
Yeah.
lounging there, and all. So just a snapshot from the past. Even this picture is significantly a snapshot from the past, like 50, 60 years ago, because you cannot see this montage anymore. It's just full of people at all times. So a lone man sitting here next to the Sarovar, you won't spot this ever again, I think, unless they just, the
Yes.
entry is kind of restricted and all. It's beautiful,
So
beautiful.
yeah, so I was very privileged to be able to go to these places in these conditions. Of course, to me, coming from England, it did feel as if everywhere was crowded by comparison.
even even back then, yeah.
Yes, it did. It did feel as if it, a lot of the time the crowds were sort of overwhelming. Yes.
And look at Eleanor here. Wow.
Yeah, this is me in a village near the Bangladesh border where I've gone for my a university friend's marriage to one of his colleagues from Bihar. In a colleague in Bihar. She's Bengali, and I was very conscious that I didn't know what I looked like because there was no mirror, and and I did look rather awkward. But
No, you've got a clean figure. And let's also share about the fact that this was the wedding of the parents of this renowned artist, Matthew Krishanu, who
yeah,
has also, done a rendition of this particular picture in paint.
yeah, that was a great surprise I had about a week ago when I saw a book
Yeah.
of his paintings, and I realized that this photograph must have been in his parents' family album as well. And
Yeah,
yes,
I saw it on Instagram as well. So if anyone's interested, they can go to Matthew Krishanu's page on Instagram and find this same picture, but in
and a lot of
paint.
more interesting ones as well.
Yeah, and yeah, a lot of more interesting ones as well. But for me, this was the most interesting actually.
I do
Also,
remember when I bought this sari, it was a very simple sari actually, but I loved the color. And I remember that the Padre's wife in Nainital was scandalized because she said it's a Hindu holy color, and I really shouldn't have chosen a sari that looked like that.
oh, is that so? My
Yes.
God, I can't believe, because we people in India today, we feel that, oh God, why are they dividing colors so much? Like, green is Islamic and orange is Hindu. But these things have, these notions have existed from a long, long time. Yeah.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was
and
even
that
more, I was
genda,
even more pleased.
and the genda fool in your hair is adding a great touch as well, celebratory
Well,
touch.
yes, and for the wedding, actually, I remember I went round the village sort of collecting flowers for the bridal bouquet because I can't remember the whole story now. Somebody listening will probably fill me in afterwards. But anyway, on the day of the wedding, there were no longer the flowers that were needed, and so so I went round collecting
So this
flowers
was
to
a
make.
Christian wedding, yeah?
This was a Bengali Christian wedding, which was
Bengali Christian wedding
yeah,
in
which
the
was
village.
wonderful for me to experience because, of course,
Yeah,
it incorporated subsidiary rituals that were simply part of Bengali culture and which are
exactly.
shared across religious borders, as well as having the Christian service at its heart.
Right, right. It must have been really amazing for you to see that. So, ma'am, how was the experience of like traveling all the way to this rural hinterland of India in the 70's? How did you actually travel, in fact? And what was the reaction of the villagers?
Oh well, I travelled by train. I mean, the reaction here was just a friendliness and curiosity, but people were a bit more used to seeing Westerners, and it was in a Christian context and the context of a wedding. But there were places that I went. For instance, I remember, um, yeah, when I was in parts of say Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh, I remember people just ganging up behind me to sort of see this remarkable phenomenon that had, that had turned up. And of course I was stared at everywhere. And when I got back to England, it was quite strange walking around and not being stared at, and nobody following me in this way. It was all
No
very
longer,
it was all
no
very
longer a
friendly. It was not
celebrity.
non-threatening. It was just curiosity. And when I went on this social work trip that was organized for some Delhi University postgraduate students. And I was supposed to be the chaperone, which was a bit of a which was a bit ridiculous, given that I came from a society in which chaperoning was a thing of the past, and I didn't know how to be a chaperone, with disastrous,
Right.
well, not with disastrous consequences, but with fairly likely ones. Anyway,
So this just want to bring in my experience here. So in our in early 90s when we were kids, there was, I don't know what exchange program. I think it happened just once. This white girl came to our school to study for a significant couple of months, I think, or maybe a year. And then everyone every day would just try to muster courage to talk to her, and she would always be surrounded by kids. Although she was like in senior school, but she was always surrounded by younger kids and all. And once I went to her and I didn't know what to say, I said, "Can I have your autograph?"
yeah.
Because taking autograph was a thing, that we would do from celebrities and all. So I was like, "Can I have your autograph?" And she just turned to me and said, "I'm not a celebrity. Why do you want my autograph?"
Well,
And I just wanted to tell her, "You are so fascinating to us. Why don't you understand?"
well, I was less of a novelty in the school where I taught, because there were Anglo-Indian teachers.
Yeah,
There had
and
been
back
a
then,
special.
there were many actually. My father also studied in a Christian school, and he had a lot of Anglo-Indian as well as British teachers. So the way they learned to speak English also is quite anglicized as compared to our English, which is more Indian, you can say, because they
Yes,
grew up with these missionary as well as I think teachers like yourself who
mm,
were more. Uh, English as
yes.
compared
I
to.
wasn't such a novelty in Nainital, but I was a novelty in the Chumble Valley.
Yeah.
And when the group went to one tribal village, I was I was asked if I was Mrs. Indira Gandhi.
Oh, what? Sorry, please come again. I heard you, but I want you to say it again.
I was in an Adivasi village, and I was asked whether I was Indira Gandhi, because nobody had any television. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't see there was no television even in Nainital. I saw black and white television in Delhi um,
Yeah.
on my travels. So it was quite understandable question, I suppose. Um,
So they asked you if you were Indira Gandhi.
I mean, the whole thing showed the sort of complete cultural um,
Wow.
incomprehension, because these students, of course, they were Indian students I was accompanying, um,
Hmm.
and they were there with a social work purpose. And so
Yeah.
they decided that they were going to focus on the evils of dowry. So we all made speeches. I had an interpreter, I suppose, but we all made speeches about the wrongness of dowry. And then afterwards we were told, well, actually, here people pay a bride price. It isn't like that.
My God, what you are saying is another example from my own life. My mother and my aunt and all, they are with an NGO, and before Diwali, they had to go to a village to distribute sweets and all, and they were talking to these Adivasi people. The tribe there is a Sabar, and in Jharkhand, and it's quite I mean, they have very little population and all. So these suburb people are also quite backward, they educationally and everything. So anyway, they were trying to tell them the story of Diwali, and they were saying Ram Bhagwan, Lord Ram had gone to for a vanvas, and vanvas is like, in if translated exactly in English, it's like a stay in the forest. Okay, so when he was banished, that 14-year period is called vanvas, where he was banished to the forest. And I just, when I heard that and I saw the video actually where my aunt was giving a speech to these villages, I was like, God, these people are vanvasis. I mean, these
They
are
live in
dwellers of the forest only. Why are you telling them this story? They will, if they had any, critical mind, they would have questioned that what is this story. I mean, yeah, what you're
yeah.
saying, we
Yeah, so I
don't
realized
understand
that
by context.
I was sort of, there was the gulf in a way between me and the Indian students, but there was just as much of a gulf, it seemed,
Exactly.
between them
Exactly.
and the
And
people.
it remains till date. Even like the diversity that we have in India is till now has not been fathomed by people. And this incident that I have shared is just like 2, 3 years ago. So yeah, people don't understand the differences of beliefs and cultures even till date.
And one of the things which local people, not particularly Adivasis, I don't think, but local people in the village where we were based, what they couldn't understand was when I mentioned that there was social work in England, and they said, "But why is there social work in England? You don't have any problems. You've got food and everything. Why do you need social work?"
Yeah, yeah,
And so there was that as well. There were all these perceptions of Britain in different places, which were revealing for me.
let's move on to the next picture because I want to see your face also quickly. We've been on these pictures. Wow.
Yes, that was one of the most wonderful experiences, being on the river at dawn in Benares.
Wow, this looks like a painting. So beautiful.
And of
Now,
course,
of course, it's been renovated and all.
yes.
It's
Well,
no
I found
longer.
Benares amazing, and also, of course, Saranath, which is
Yeah,
so tranquil and also so international with all its. Then they seemed very new: the Japanese temple, the Thai temple, the Sri Lankan temple, and so on.
right,
But here
right.
in Benares, I was hosted by a Christian
No,
padre.
this Japanese temple, Sri Lankan temple, I think you're talking about Bodh Gaya.
I think I'm talking about both, aren't I?
Yeah,
Or not?
because that you've been to Bodh Gaya, right?
I have been to both. Have I confused the
Yeah.
two? I thought that there was
Yes,
a presence in
yes.
both.
This temple from Buddhists of other countries is in Bodh Gaya, not in
Okay,
South.
so
Yeah,
this is what happens. Your memory makes it telescopes things together.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and of course, the atmosphere was similar in the two places. Bodh
Hmm.
Gaya, yes, I visited on my return journey from going across North India to a place called Hazaribagh in Bihar, where a friend and a colleague from All Saints Nainital was hoping to spend her last days of her final illness. And on the way back, yes, I was able to break the journey in Bodh Gaya. That's right.
Oh, oh.
So
So
thanks for correcting me there. That's
we'll talk about Hazaribagh later. A friend of mine has recently written a book on Hazaribagh, and that book has won the Young Sahitya Academy Award, Literature Academy Award of India. It's written about the landscape of Hazaribagh. In fact, I'll try to get that book to you. I think you would like to read it.
I'm
It's a
sure I
very,
will.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm reflecting on what you say about, as it were, transposing the Buddhist sites, because Sanchi I also have in my mind when I think about Buddhist places I've been to, and they all combine in my memory.
I can understand, yeah, and especially like these sites like Sarnath and Sanchi and all, they are ruins mostly, so they look similar as well. But yeah, both Gaya is distinct
Yes, you're
with
right.
all these temples from different countries and the tree and all of that. But yeah, I can understand that your mind has kind of clubbed the Buddhist,
Yes, it's interesting
circuit together.
what the memory does, and I may have done that with other
Yeah,
places as well.
yeah, and this one is.
This must be Lucknow. It must be the residency.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I didn't know of the horrors of 1857 when I visited. I was discovering all of this as I went to Kanpur and saw the well down
Yeah.
which the bodies had been thrown, and I went to Lucknow. I didn't know anything about Sir Henry Lawrence. I did the
Right.
history. I discovered it as I went around, and I was
As a
amazed.
British person, how did it strike you? Because even as an Indian, it struck me so hard when I went to the residency, seeing this side of the, you know, fierce battle of independence that we had in 1857. How did it strike you? And did you go around looking at the graves there?
Yes, it made me feel very, very solemn, very sober,
Yeah.
knowing that I needed to find out a lot more.
Yeah.
It was appalling. But I was already, when I look back actually at my letters, I see how very anti-colonial or very hostile, critical anyway, to the idea of imperialism I was at that time. So it would have sort of been confirming, I think,
Hmm.
views that I was already developing, rather than being a total shock. I think Jallianwala Bagh, when I visited in Amritsar, I think that was more of a shock somehow.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Because of course, there's this sense of justice also, even though people are dying in both places, but there's also this thing that here people are attacking for their freedom and all of that, and there they were kind of unilaterally, attacked from one side. Maybe that's one thing to think of. Anyway, moving on.
yeah,
This
we're back at the school now. I don't know if people still see this scene. They'll probably tell me. But
no,
this is the dudwala and the ayah who is cleaning the rice.
the rice thing we still see, but doodwalas generally don't come on horsebacks anymore.
Well, maybe not. Maybe they do in the hills. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah, maybe still in the hills, but like I've not seen. Interesting, interesting. And you also like felt that it should be captured is another interesting part.
Yes, I was very interested in the servants and rather ashamed seeing the conditions that they lived in, another part of the slope, and realize, yes, and especially during the emergency, when servants wouldn't get their rations unless they'd been sterilized and that sort of thing. And I realized the oppression of poorer people and how
Yeah.
little agency they can have.
Oh God. And this is the Nanny Lake.
It is, yes.
Is this the view from your room or what?
It's pretty much like the view from my room. I'm not sure exactly where I was standing when I took that. Um, it
Lovely.
and the lake sometimes changed color, and there was one occasion when it changed color and rumors spread about not quite the end of the world, but the end of the nanny tourist industry. And then I see in one of my letters I wrote that the rumor monger had been arrested.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And this is the school.
This is the school, yes, All Saints.
It's still there, yeah?
It's still there. It's very much there. But it's
Oh,
only there thanks to Sarojini Naidu, because the headmistress in my time used to tell me how the governor of how the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh,
huh.
Sarojini Naidu, had queried the numbers of children in the school when she heard that it was due for closure, and the way she queried the numbers made people. It made it seem as if there must be more students than there were. In fact, there were fewer students than she'd been told. But anyway, the school was saved for posterity. And then
Oh,
later on, I discovered that Sarojini Naidu was a poet, and in my English classes, I was even teaching some of her poems, which I found extremely lyrical and
yeah.
joyous to read. And then I just discovered that she had been a student at my college, so I felt very grateful to Sarojini Naidu
Of your
altogether.
college as well.
Sorry?
Of your college in
Yes,
England.
yes, she studied at my college. I didn't know that at the time when I was teaching in the school which she had rescued from being closed down,
Which
which it would
college
have,
did you go to, ma'am, once again?
Girton College in Cambridge.
Okay, okay,
But
Gordon College in Cambridge.
so All
All right.
Saints might not have continued to carry on because it was originally for what they called Anglo-Indian children, which I am guessing meant a lot of Sahib's children. In 1947, they were in short supply. But by the time I got there 27 years later,
Yeah.
the school was mainly full of Punjabi children whose families had relocated from further west
Okay.
in Punjab after
Okay.
1947.
Okay. And these are your beautiful, beautiful paintings.
Yes, I just had the watercolor box that I had when I was a child at school, and I had ballpoint pens, biros. So I would just draw in biro and then use the watercolors or crayons or felt tips or whatever I had to hand before the flowers died, which they often did because I had stacks of marking to do. I couldn't just sit around painting things, and the flowers the flowers didn't always survive, which was sad. But
Recently, there was a thriller, about a similar, a woman who had similar interests, although it was quite a thriller and everything. It involves murder and all. But that woman, she also painted, but animals she used to paint with very little supplies. Uh, it's called Where the Crawdads Sing.
oh
If you can
yes,
watch.
I've read
Ha,
it.
have you watched it? Have you heard of it? It's
I've read
also a
the
book.
book. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know the story I'm talking about.
Yes, yes.
So when
Well,
watched that movie, I was thinking about you so much because of your drawings here. And I was also thinking if you could have had a book published on this as well. Wow. So
yes. Oh, that's
nice.
like yellow balsam. I saw in one of my letters I'd written how the yellow balsam was attacked by little blue beetles, but the little blue beetles were as beautiful as the flowers. So it was quite magical.
Lovely. So we come to the end of this slide sharing and back to just you and I.
Thank you for showing
So
those.
yeah, no, it was my pleasure. Lovely pictures those were. Um, so ma'am, let's talk about how the safety situation back in the 70's was
Oh,
not great,
yes.
and you
Yes, that's
seem
really
to really
interesting.
travel. You seem to have traveled like through the length and breadth of India, so it was notorious times in terms of dacoits. So how did you ensure your
Well,
safety?
like I say, I felt very safe because of the kindness of people around. But when I arrived in Nainital at the beginning of my first week in the school, everyone heaved a sigh of relief because the night bus from Delhi the night before had been attacked by dacoits because there was a wedding party on board and they were after the jewelry, I suppose. So there was an armed guard on the bus that I came up on, and then I, I thought about dacoits several times after that, because when I think I was on a train traveling through Rajasthan with 3 friends, and the guard came up to each person and said, we've been told that dacoits may attack the train, so we advise one of your group to stay awake all night. So I think 2 of our group of 4 stayed up, in turns, sort of playing cards or whatever it was we were doing. But how that would have helped us if dacoits had attacked us, I'm not quite sure.
Sure, exactly. Did you all have any weapons on you?
No, well, I had a fruit
Just
knife
stay
that a friend
awake.
had given me before I left for India,
Just
which I
stay
still
awake.
have.
Hmm.
Um, and then I remember being told that the the father of the bride in the wedding that I went to in Bengal, that in his congregation he had one reformed dacoit who was a respected member of the congregation. And I can understand that, because when I went to the Jumble Valley on my social work week with these Delhi students, we were going there because it was the place where famous dacoits, uh, as a result of an amnesty, were now respected members of society, and they'd come out of prison. So there was a Gandhian ashram which was set up by somebody called Subbarao, who was a famous Gandhian and devoted part of his life to bringing peace to the Chambal Valley through dozens and dozens of acts of reconciliation. And this amnesty that I think was probably in 1973 or 1974, anyway, just before we visited. And Tasildar Singh, who had been in prison for about 18 years,
Tehsildar Singh.
yes, he was there in the village, very much respected. And you said how you didn't know how to speak to this strange-looking white woman who turned up in your school. I didn't know what to say to this dacoit who'd murdered people and been in prison, and his father had been responsible for many, many murders, Man Singh. But I just sort of, I didn't know what to say. But I noticed he had blue eyes, which was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah. Blue eyes, a blue-eyed dacoit you met by the name of Tehsildar Singh. Wow.
But when I came back to Delhi afterwards, as far as I know, I looked very ill after my week. I'd been drinking well water, and the well water was very definitely not clean. And so I was looking quite ill, but I was telling people how I'd met Tasildar Singh, which, I began to realize that this was something, quite important. I'd never heard of dacoits, or, the particular named dacoits anyway, before this particular escapade. And now I had this experience that I could relate to people in Delhi, and they must have thought, why on earth did this woman go there? But it was because of a Dutch Quaker in Delhi who was concerned about introducing Delhi students to social work. And she said, "Will you go?" And I went, and it was one of the most memorable trips of my life. I mean, not only because of, you know, the exciting personalities that I encountered and the Adivasi people and so on, but, you know, the fields of mustard in full bloom, the wild peacocks everywhere. It was just visually so stunning. And of course, the poverty was very stark.
Yeah. Yeah. Your reflections on that about poverty that you witnessed, because nothing like that you could see in England.
No, but it was not long after I got back that Britain started to have a visible presence of beggars on the streets and so on.
Okay. Okay. So, ma'am, before we go any further, I would like to I would like to kind of announce that all our audience, if you all have any questions from Professor Nesbitt, please do write down about them, and I will be asking those questions during this session. So, ma'am, one of my friends is asking. His name is Siddharth. He's in fact he's also done his PhD from Cambridge. So he's asking. He's saying, didn't know you were in Nainital. Actually, he's an enthusiast of Himalayas, and he's written quite a lot on the mountains. So he is saying, glad to find the Himalayan connection. Um, did you ever meet Penelope Chetwood in your trips, who was popular as a traveler in Himalayas then?
No, I didn't. I'll have to look out for that name.
Okay.
And I look forward to hearing more.
Okay. He's also writing Penelope Chetwood. Huh?
Yeah,
So
I
he's
will have a look.
Yeah. So he's also written, glad you met Laurie Baker, such an inspiration. We have almost lost those ideals of ecological architecture that Baker worked and promoted. So okay, so friends, if there's any other question that you all have, please do ask. So, ma'am, Siddharth is also asking another thing. He's saying, "Wow, what a slideshow! You said that in Nainital, seeing a white person wasn't so out of place as it was in Central India. I want to ask about your perception of Nainital as a hill station in the common people's lives in 1970s. So as a tourist destination, hill station, as someone who has been studying the history of perception in the context of Shimla, which is another hill station, it would be great to know how people viewed Nainital at that time."
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I remember that for the Durga Puja holidays, a lot of Bengalis would come to Nainital, and I was told it was because of the continuing tradition in the hills of buffalo sacrifice. But I never checked that out. It was
What
certainly a
sacrifice?
buffalo,
Buffalo
but
sacrifice.
I never checked. I never checked that out. I mean, for me, it was interesting because I'd grown up near Bournemouth, which of course was originally a Victorian holiday resort, and here was another, if you like, Victorian holiday resort. So I could see parallels. I think that people just enjoyed visiting Nainital because of the beauty of the lake and the surrounding possibilities for walking and so on. What I read now is that it's become much more of a concrete jungle, and people deplore the incursion of concrete and
You
people
can't
and traffic.
imagine. You wouldn't want to go back there again.
But at that time, it was pretty idyllic in a
Yeah.
number of ways.
Yeah. All right. Your friend Sarita is saying, this reminds me when you were surrounded by the local people at the bus stand at Sri Ganganagar.
Ah, thank you, Sarita. Yes, Sri Ganganagar was a great experience. That very near the border with Pakistan, and with sort of a lot of Punjabis, but not quite in Punjab. I remember going to the cinema there. I remember a whole lot of things from Sri Ganganagar. That was another of the many interesting experiences that I had, which of course included hospitality. But I'd
So,
forgotten that I was particularly surrounded by people there because I'd
Sri
got used to
Ganganagar is
doing
in
everything.
Rajasthan. Am I
Hmm?
right? Sri
Yes,
Ganganagar is in
yes,
Rajasthan, right?
yes, yes.
Okay, okay. So another person, Laura Sparks, is saying, I was at Republic Day in 1977. Amazed I didn't bump into you.
She was saying what? She was at
She
Republic Day in
was at
19.
the Republic Day in
Yes,
1977.
yes.
She's saying, I'm amazed I didn't bump into you.
That's strange, isn't it? Because we were at college together.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
but
again, because nobody had WhatsApp status update at that time to let each other know where they are, and they couldn't connect. That's why. So you get to learn after what 45 years that y'all were in the same place at the same time in another
yes,
country.
yes. But I think I visited one of her mother's friends in Delhi. There were all these interconnections,
Yeah.
even if we weren't aware we were in the same place.
Yeah.
But in fact, in
So
1977, I'm not sure if I was there or whether I was only there in 76. I think in 77, I was traveling around South India at that time. So that
okay.
might explain as well why we didn't meet up.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, maybe that's the reason. So ma'am, a year into your stay, the emergency was implemented by the Indira Gandhi government. Uh, Indira Gandhi again is making me laugh thinking about how they thought you were Indira Gandhi.
They were only asking, they didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Even to ask is ridiculous. But anyway, so ma'am, what was living in India as an expat like before and during emergency? And
Well, of course,
what are your
beforehand, I didn't know that
what
the
what
emergency.
all do you remember from that time and the whole political
Yeah,
climate at that time?
before the emergency, I wasn't aware that something like this was going to happen. I do remember an announcement that foreigners too could be detained, without trial, and I realised, oh, this is serious. And I remember going to the local cinema in Nainital with colleagues, and I don't know what I said, but at some point I went shh, 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 and I realised, we've got to be more cautious now. I've mentioned the fact that there was this drive for sterilisation. So you would hear that, somebody was a bit tipsy. I'm talking about, again, people like coolies and bearers and, the people who were the infrastructure, who were most dependent on other people for their livelihood. And, somebody would come home a bit tipsy and he would be picked up by the police and would be sterilised, that sort of thing. Or somebody who may be listening telling me that her sister's pay had been stopped for 3 months because she hadn't had enough people sterilised to qualify for her own salary. So there was that going on. And then also there was this great efficiency. The public transport, you could be on a bus in Delhi and it would be the same journey would be inspected twice over. And everywhere there were slogans. So I that's what my Hindi was at the time. I was learning, do bache ache, hum do hamare do, kam adhik, bating kam. And I got quite good at reading these stenciled slogans off the sides of buses as they as they trundled along. So there were these. I mean, I think that there tended to be these rather moral phrases plastered around the place a bit more than they are in this country, but there were far more of them, it seemed, during the emergency. And then just shortly before I left, the emergency, came to an end.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting period to be there, and I would keep hearing the name of Jayaprakash Narayan and various, I would hear about political dissidents being imprisoned and that sort of thing.
So this thing that you're talking about, the efficiency of public transport, many Indira Gandhi loyalists, even till date, like our grandparents and all, their generation, they would just say, "Oh, it was so good during emergency because the trains and buses were running on time," as if nothing else was happening, and only it was like a transport revolution during emergency, and that was all about it.
But of course, I was rather secluded and cocooned, living in
Yeah.
an English medium boarding school high up in the mountains.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you didn't really encounter any trouble or anything during emergency. You were cautious enough.
No, there wasn't. But I think that I was under suspicion as a foreigner, whether during the emergency particularly, I don't know. But I remember in the middle of nowhere in Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh, suddenly this uniformed person turning up and asking me for my palace of residence, and of course I had to be careful not to laugh. I mean, obviously he wanted my place of residence, but I realized that I was under, or people like me were probably being watched a bit
Yeah.
more maybe than at other times. I don't know.
So, ma'am, as we are kind of drawing towards the last segment of our discussion, share with us about your best and worst memories or experiences that you had here in India, both best and worst.
Well, of course, the best stretched on day after day, month after month, because it was just a brilliant period of my life, and it changed my life in so many positive ways. The bad things usually only lasted for a second, and the bad things usually involve something good. So I remember feeling hurt by something someone had said when I was in the school, and I went out into the jungle, outside between the senior school and the junior school. So I was sitting there in the undergrowth, feeling rather miserable. So that was a bad feeling. But then I looked up and I saw there was a jackal that was standing just beside me. Now, I don't know about jackals, and I don't know if they if they tend to be empathetic or what. I'd been rather frightened of them before, hearing the noise at night and seeing them slinking along in the daytime. But this jackal, just sort of sat there with me. And so I thought, oh, this is a bad experience, but this has been this wonderful
Wow. Yeah.
experience that's come out of it.
Seriously, what a nice experience, actually.
I would never have thought I would be grateful to a jackal.
Yeah. No, but a
And
wild animal coming to you and, it's a gift.
I
It's a
think it was
gift.
because I was so still. I was so caught up in my own miserable thoughts. Because
Yeah.
as soon as I moved, of course, he scarpered off.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were moments of panic. Like I took my father to Chandigarh to stay with friends whose family I had become so much a part of. And we'd been on the bus for hours. We arrived at the bus stand in Chandigarh, and I hadn't brought the address with me, and I couldn't remember what it was. So I thought, what do I do? What's my father going to think? He's so well organized, and his daughter's brought him all this way, and she can't remember where she's going. So I just, somebody came up, a rickshawwala came up and asked where I was going. And I said, well, I don't know where I'm going. And he said, well, what sort of person are you going to see? So I said, I'm going to see somebody who's an SP. So he said, oh, I know where to take you. So he took me right to the road. And I thought,
Okay.
this could never happen in England.
Yeah. No, no, no. In India, at least people in authority and all, they are well known by everyone. So, yeah, that's interesting.
So yes, I had my moments of panic, but they always seem to resolve themselves. Thank goodness.
Yeah. So, best moment you can't really, even if you can
Well,
say,
the
share top
best
three.
moments are to do with just watching the sun rising in the Himalaya. I mean, that is just
Yeah.
amazing. And yeah, just the feeling of happiness with people's friendships.
So, ma'am, you went on to do ethnographic research on the Sikh community in the UK, and you're one of the pioneers of Global Sikh Studies today. So, how did this first long trip, rather stay in India, shape your life um,
Well,
after?
I suppose the thing was that when I came back to England, I knew that I was going to try to work amongst people from South Asia, and jobs were being advertised by various local authorities, including Coventry, where I've lived virtually ever since, for people to come and teach what they called English as a second language. So I got a job here, and most of my pupils in school and my adult students were Punjabis, just as most of my students in school had been Punjabi. And I didn't know anything about Sikhism, and so I was curious. I wanted to learn more, and I hadn't been able to learn very much in India. I'd been to Shishganj Gurdwara in Delhi. I think seen Rakabganj Gurdwara. I'd been on Guru Nanak's birthday on the Gurpurab. I'd been down to the Gurdwara by the lake with the Sikh pupils who were allowed a special trip out to go down to the Gurdwara. But nobody, they couldn't tell me anything. I mean, how could they? They were children, and they'd been brought up in this English medium atmosphere. And I obviously wanted to know what was going on. If somebody cried Jobole, Sonihal, I wanted to know what it meant. And of course, they couldn't tell me. There's no English way of doing it, really. So when I came back, when I'd finished, I certainly taught for a year or so in Coventry, I started looking around for ways in which I could learn more about Sikhism. And the obvious thing seemed to be to go back to university. And I contacted various universities, and it was the University of Nottingham which had actually advertised for someone to come on a special fellowship to explore Sikh tradition in Nottingham. So that, you know, that was the way in which my being in India and my Sikh studies, you know, were connected.
Yeah. Wow. And ma'am, how many times have you returned to India since? How many more visits have you made?
Feels like 4. I haven't actually kept count. I went back in the 1980s. I went back in the 1990s. I went back in the early 2000s, and then more recently for a holiday in Kerala. But that's it, because I feel as if I'm in India all the time, really, with Indian television and just being part of an Indian family and
Yeah.
all the
So
opportunities that you have in multicultural Britain now.
let's announce that you're married to an Indian man, and that's the reason for your enduring connection and your whole, immersive experience that you have basically about, India so much more real time. So, ma'am, having married an Indian person, having dedicated your life to studies that are largely related to India, what are some of your enduring thoughts about this country?
About India.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose I have a sort of nostalgia for my experience then, and I'm hoping that all the obvious progress isn't at the cost of so much that was wonderful then. And I'm hoping that westernization, or whatever we're calling it, also means a reconsideration of some entrenched values, which of course I found very difficult as a woman from the West. I don't need to start talking about patriarchy and so on and so on. But I think what I feel at the moment is that there's a tremendous surge of optimism in India, a young population, aspirational, excited. I'm not getting into talking about the politics, but I'm just talking about the demography, really, and the mood. Whereas I'm in a country which doesn't feel like that. It's aging, and it doesn't feel optimistic in the same way. So I love the optimism in India.
So, with this, we come to an end of our discussion today. And of course, as always, it has been great talking to you. Lots to learned a lot from this conversation, and just so interesting, each and everything. I'm really interested in your inland letters, really getting my hands on them someday.
Well, you'll have to come back.
Yes, yes. Hopefully, I would someday. So, ma'am, show us the nest, no?
Oh yes, my various treasures from India.
Yeah, your various treasures from India. So,
This
friends,
is
this is a
a weaver bird's nest, I think, from Haldwani, and it's still as robust and beautifully made. It's a model of construction and functionality, and yes, so it wasn't just the resourcefulness, the resilience, and so on of the people that was amazing, but just the skills of the wildlife as well. But
so
talking
this is
about the skills of the people, I treasure this as well, which is the figure of a man. I think he's a sadhu. He's got an iktara of sorts, a one-stringed instrument. The
yeah.
dustier he gets, the more authentic he looks, and he's made from the mud of Bengal.
Ma'am, can you bring it closer to the camera, please? No, no, no. Up. Yeah. It's lovely. So nice. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for your time, for this wonderful talk, for rejigging your memory and sharing all these little snippets. I'm sure you have so much more, in those letters of yours. If one has the time to, go through them, I'm sure it's a treasure. But really, heartiest gratitude for coming on Mast Qalandar Travels. And let's just keep talking as always, ma'am.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm sorry if I was a bit garbled and if any of my memories are false memories, but I think you've got the impression that I loved being in India.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. That as well as all the interesting things about, the dacoit experience and so many unique things that no longer exist. That's the beauty of really deep diving into the past. Because even for us sitting here in India, there's no way we can experience or even see many of these sites that you saw. I have almost seen all of them, but they don't look the same anymore. So it was great. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, it's quite
Yeah,
easy to get hold of me through a University of Warwick email address.
yes, and I will be posting her email address on the comments as well underneath this conversation on YouTube. So for all of you who want to watch or who want to share this, please share the same YouTube link with your friends and family, uh, and it will be available on the live section of my YouTube channel. For forever as long as YouTube remains and they don't shut shop. And please do subscribe to Mast Qalandar Travels, which is my YouTube channel. I generally host a live conversation like this every Sunday, and I try to post travel and learn kind of videos every other week. So thank you very much. Bye bye, and we'll end this broadcast here.
Bye bye.